When a father demands perfection, it's not always about love. It's often about control. Growing up with a narcissistic father often means living in a world where love feels conditional and approval is earned, not given. From the outside, he might appear devoted, a hardworking provider, a proud parent at school events. But behind closed doors, everything is measured by impossible standards. Perfection is not encouraged. It's demanded. A B+ isn't pretty good. It's a disappointment. A minor mistake isn't a learning opportunity. It's a character flaw. What's worse, the child begins to internalize this pressure, believing their worth is directly tied to how flawlessly they perform. Over time, love feels like a reward for obedience, not a birthright. And that belief follows them into adulthood like a shadow, showing up in their careers, relationships, and sense of self. This isn't just about strict parenting. This is about a deep, emotional void disguised as discipline. And for many, the damage doesn't fade with time. It grows, quietly shaping the way they see themselves forever. It started small. A corrected essay, a missed free throw, a crooked tie. You were a kid, still learning. But to him, mistakes weren't moments. They were insults. Every flaw was a reflection of his failure, and he made sure you knew it. Fix your posture. Why didn't you win? Is that the best you can do? You thought this was normal. You thought every dad measured love in size and silence. You learned quickly. Applause was rare. Criticism was currency. If he smiled, it meant you had jumped through just the right hoop. If he stayed silent, it meant you'd failed him. Again, you didn't know what affection felt like without performance. Praise only came when it served his ego. When you played the piano, he didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He said, "They all looked at me when you hit that high note." Soon, you became your own punisher. You tore yourself down before he could. You triple-checked homework, rehearsed every word before you spoke, wore perfection like armor. But inside, you were a battlefield, exhausted, brittle, terrified. Because the scariest part wasn't disappointing him. It was believing you deserved it. At some point, you stopped asking for hugs. Not because you didn't need them, but because you learned they were earned, not given. His love had terms. Fine print you had to decode. Score a goal, and maybe he'd pat you on the back. Win a spelling bee, and you might get a nod. But if you cried after losing, or worse, failed in front of others, you'd see his jaw tighten, his eyes go cold. There was no room for vulnerability in his house. Emotions were weakness. Struggles were shameful. If you felt pain, you were dramatic. If you asked for help, you were lazy. So you adapted. You became hyper-independent, high-achieving, hungry for approval. And yet, nothing was ever enough. You got the A, but he asked why it wasn't an A+. You landed the internship, but he pointed out who got the better one. Your victories weren't yours. They were his to critique, his to claim, or his to dismiss. And slowly, you stopped celebrating your own wins. You brushed off compliments. You minimized your achievements. You stopped believing in joy without condition, because you had been trained to associate love with achievement, not existence. And the saddest part, you started doing the same to yourself. You thought you left him behind when you moved out. You thought freedom meant silence. No more lectures. No more raised eyebrows when you weren't your best. But his voice didn't stay in the house. It came with you. It disguised itself as your inner critic. It whispered in job interviews, in new relationships, in quiet nights alone. Not good enough. Not fast enough. Not perfect. Even when people praised you, you doubted them. You assumed they were just being polite. Compliments felt suspicious. Affection felt conditional. And every time you stumbled, missed a deadline, gained a few pounds, forgot to return a call, you punished yourself in ways he would have been proud of. You inherited his expectations without even realizing it. And in love, you gravitated toward partners who demanded too much. Because it felt familiar, you confused pressure with care. You mistook control for structure. And worst of all, when someone truly accepted you as you were, you didn't trust it. You waited for the moment they'd see your flaws and leave. Because that's what love did, right? It judged. It withdrew. It turned cold the second you stopped performing. That's the lasting wound of being raised for perfection. You become your own captor. One day it all just cracked. Maybe it was a bad review at work. Maybe it was a partner calling you out for never opening up. Or maybe it was something small, dropping a glass and finding yourself frozen, bracing for a punishment that never came. That's when it hit you. He's not in the room anymore, but you still flinch like he is. You realize you spent your whole life trying to impress a ghost, a man who couldn't offer unconditional love, because he never learned how to give it. You were chasing a version of yourself that didn't exist. The perfect child, flawless, silent, accomplished, immune to failure. And worse, you were forcing yourself to keep running toward that version, just to feel worthy of existing. That's when the grief came, not just for the childhood you lost, but for the self you buried, the messy, curious, joyful version of you that was never allowed to show up. The one who could make mistakes without fear. The one who could say, "I need help," and not feel ashamed. The one who was lovable even when they weren't exceptional. That grief is sacred, because it means you're finally seeing the truth. His love wasn't love. It was validation masquerading as parenting. It was ego dressed up as discipline. And once you see that, really see it, you start to understand something powerful. You were never broken. You were just trying to survive someone else's emptiness. The freedom you deserve. Emotion, you're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from carrying the weight of someone else's approval for your entire life. You spent years trying to be enough. For him, for everyone, for that voice in your head that sounds so much like his. And deep down, you've always feared that the moment you stop trying, you'll lose whatever love is left. Logic. But love that disappears when you stop performing was never real to begin with. That wasn't love. That was leverage. Real love stays when you're quiet, when you're messy, when you're healing. It doesn't keep a scoreboard. It doesn't hand out affection like a reward. And it sure as hell doesn't demand perfection from a child who just wanted to be seen. Narrative. Somewhere inside you is a kid who used to draw without worrying if it was good enough. The teenager who wanted to cry and be held without shame. The adult who craves softness, not just from others, but from yourself. That version of you isn't lost, just hidden behind years of armor built for survival. And now, finally, you're learning how to take it off. Piece by piece, truth by truth, breakthrough. Because here's the truth no one ever told you. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to carry his voice anymore. You are not his reflection. You are not his project. You are your own. And that is enough. Thank you for listening. If any part of this touched your story, feel free to share in the comments. Your voice matters here. You're not alone. And if you found this helpful, please subscribe, and support the channel so we can keep creating safe spaces for healing.